I told your predecessor never to come here, von Hallstatt said, staring at the Skaven with barely concealed distaste. He hated it when anyone else but him entered his filing chamber. The servants might see you. The Rat Man met his gaze levelly. There was something about this one that made von Hallstatt nervous. Perhaps it was the greyish fur, or perhaps it was the strange, blind-seeming eyes, but there was something different about this one, something scary. This one is not as the other man-things. Grey Seer, this one is. Mage Lord in the service of the 13. Contracted to the clan, but not part of it. Important I see you. Things went badly with the guards. Many Skaven dead. But my servants. Worry not, foolish man-thing. They snore sleep. A simple spell. Von Hallstatt laid down his file. He marked the place with an uninked quill and closed it gently. He let his hand fall near the hilt of his blade. The touch of it reassured him somewhat. He met the Skaven's stare and dared it to look away. I'm unused to being called foolish. Do not do so again. The Skaven smiled. It was not calming. For a second, the magistrate felt as if it might leap forward and bite him. He kept his hand on his weapon. With an almost imperceptible shake of its head, the Skaven stopped smiling. It twitched its tail. Of course. So sorry. Many apologies, yes. Grieve for the loss of kin. Cost many warp tokens to replace. I accept your apology. Von Hallstatt was reassured. It was obscurely pleasing that even so monstrous-seeming a creature as the Rat Man felt a sense of loss at the death of his relatives. Still, he found himself longing for the day when he would no longer have to deal with the Skaven and could have them destroyed. He picked up the file and returned it to its precise place in the proper cabinet. The man-things are dangerous to our association. Know your appearance and can pick-choose you from others. They must not be allowed to threaten you or us. True. The thought was worrying. Von Hallstatt's enemies were legion, and the slightest hint of scandal would be used against him. The treacherous Suadax would sell that information to the highest bidder, he felt sure. Their lack of loyalty to the cause of humanity sickened him. They deserved to die, and to think he had once felt sorry for them. They must die. Yes, yes, and you must show us where to find them. That is straightforward enough. I had their watch captain interviewed today. He opened a new cabinet and pulled out a slim dossier. Here is my file on them. Good, good. Soon they will all die. Once safely back in the sewer, Grey Seer Thankwell cursed to himself. He was tired of dealing with morons like Zarkual and the man-thing von Hallstatt. He would have preferred to be back home in his warm burrow in Skavenblight, surrounded by his breeders and with a few captive humans to run through his maze. He missed the beautiful rotting aroma of the swamps, and he was worried about the intrigues which might be taking place against him in his absence. He hated working with the idiot Zarkual, who could not even carry out the simple assassination of 5 man-things properly. The thought of the host leader's chittering excuses made Thanquol want to bite his own tail with anger. By the 13, it was true. If you wanted a bone gnawed properly, you had to gnaw it yourself. No sense in trusting vital tasks to the likes of the useless host leader. Still, his masters had assigned him to Zarkul's clan, and he was obliged by the binding oaths of his order to implement and expedite their plans. And this one was sound. It resounded to Clan Scab's credit in the great game being played back in Skavenblight. He could see that, foolish though he was, von Hallstatt represented a valuable agent to have in place. Of all the humans he had ever met, the Spymaster thought most like a Skaven. A very stupid Skaven, admittedly, but still a Skaven. He was easy to manipulate due to his strange jealousy of, and attraction to, the breeder Emmanuel, prepared to believe anything so long as it was connected to her. Imagine thinking that the Skaven used the city's rats as spies. Foolish man-thing. However, von Hallstatt had proven useful in removing those who might prove to be a threat to the long-term plans of the 13, and he was an adroit and effective collector of the warpstone so necessary for the continued research plans of the Seers. Yes, it would be wise to resist the urge to slay the man-thing. He was more useful alive than dead, at least until the great day came and humanity writhed beneath the talons of the Skaven once more. Thanquol easily deciphered the strange scratch marks humans called writing. He had trained all his life for this. The study of mankind and its arts were his particular forte. Von Hallstatt had thoughtfully attached the maps showing the closest sewers to the victims' dwellings. The man-thing was not entirely incompetent. How convenient! 2 of the man-things dwelled together in an easily accessible place. He would start with them. "Come, Bone Ripper. I have work for you this night," Thanquol squeaked. The rat ogre growled its ascent from the shadows. Enormous claws slid smoothly from their sheaths at the prospect of food. Hef was lurching drunkenly down the muddy side street when he heard the sounds of a struggle coming from the hovel which he shared with Gilda and his brother. He knew he shouldn't have stayed in the tavern for that last pint with Gotrek. If Big Jax and his men had returned for vengeance while he was away, he would never forgive himself. The hook knife felt cool and reassuring in his hand. He wished he were more sober, but that was not to be helped. He broke into a trot and almost immediately tripped over a pile of rotting garbage in the path. At night, without street lighting, the new quarter was a death trap. He picked himself up and set off more carefully along the lane. As he recalled, there was an open sewer near here and it wouldn't do to fall in. He heard Gilda scream, and all thought of caution vanished when the scream ended in a moan of pain. He ran, scrabbling over the garbage, knocking over a pile of muck. He knew that no one else but him would answer a scream for help in Cheap Street. It was that sort of area. Flames started to leap skyward over the hovel. Someone must have knocked over a lamp in the struggle. He heard a feral snarl come from within the hut. Maybe Jax had brought his tame war dogs, as he had threatened. Hef covered the open ground near the entrance in one final sprint. By the light of the flames flickering within, he could see that the door had been ripped off its hinges. something moved within. His brother met him at the door. Spider opened his mouth and tried to speak. Blood gushed forth. Hef caught him as he fell forward. As his arms met round his brother's back, he felt the hole and the great soft mass of the lungs pumping through it. Spider moaned and was still. It was a nightmare. He had returned home, and his home was in flames. His brother was dead. No, that could not be. He and Spider had been inseparable since they could walk. They had served on the same fishing boat, stolen the same money, ran off together to the same city, lived with the same girl. They had the same life. If Spider was dead, then... Hef stood absolutely still, tears streaming down his face as the monstrous shape emerged from the ruins of the burning hut and loomed over him. The last thing he heard was the sound of chittering from behind. Felix was up bright and early. He made his way down the muddy streets of the new quarter, ignoring the pool of smoke that rose from the shantytown near Cheap Street. Another fire, he supposed. Well, he had been lucky. The wind had not fanned the flames in the direction of Frau Zorin's tenement. If they had, he might have died in his sleep. And he couldn't afford to die just now. He still had things to do. He turned left down Rotten Row and hit the cobbled streets of Commercial Way. Coaches clattered past as merchants made their way to the coffee houses before starting business for the day. He found his way to the Hall of Archives and made his way to the division of the planning office with responsibility for sewers. He knew he would find what he needed there. 3/4 of an hour, much browsing through ancient, dust-covered files and plans, 2 threats, and 1 bribe later, he had proven himself to be correct. Pleased with himself, Felix made his way to the watchhouse. They were instantly assigned to help out the rest of the watch in the area that had burned, burying the dead, searching the rubble for the living. They marched up to the shantytown to take a look. The fire had ripped through many hovels. The burned and the disfigured dead were everywhere. A little boy, his face blackened by soot, sat near an old woman who whimpered quietly to herself. "What happened here, son?" Felix asked. "It was the rat demon what did it," the boy said. "I saw it myself. It killed the men who lived there and carried them below to feast. Ma says it'll come for me next if I don't behave." Felix exchanged looks with Gotrek. Savage interest was evident in the troll slayer's one good eye. "There's no such thing as rat demons, lad. Don't lie to us. We're with the watch." "There is too. I saw it with my own eyes. It was taller than you and heavier than that big one-eyed dwarf. It was led by a smaller rat man with grey skin and horns on its head." "Did anyone else see it?" "Don't know. I hid. I thought they might take me too." Felix shook his head and went to check the ruins of Hef and Spider's hut. There was little left of the pitiful building, save the burned-out remains and the charred corpse of a woman. No sign of Hef or Spider. Gotrek shook his head and pointed with his toe to something grey and sharp lying in the ashes. "That's Hef's knife." Felix bent and picked it up. The metal was still warm from lying in the embers. Felix looked at the corpse. The smell of burnt meat filled his nostrils. "Gilda?" Felix said. Felix shook his head. Sorrow and rage filled him. He had liked the brothers. They had been good men. Now he wanted vengeance. "You were an engineer once, Gotrek. Tell me what these mean." Felix ignored the Trollslayer's incredulous look. He cleared a space on the table in the watchroom and spread out the charts. Rudy watched curiously as he smoothed the cracked old parchment flat and weighed down each corner with an empty tea mug. The Slayer gave his attention back to the papers. "These are charts of the sewers, Manling. Dwarf made plans of the old quarter." "That's correct. They show the area beneath Chief Magistrate von Hallstatt's mansion. If you look closely, you'll discover that it's not too far from the place where Gant was killed. I'd also bet if we looked we'd find a way up from the sewers to his house." A frown creased Rudy's low brow. "You're suggesting that we break into Fritz von Hallstatt's house? We'll be hung if we're caught. We might even lose our jobs." "That would be a pity. What do you say? Are you in, Rudy?" "I don't know." "Gotrek?" "Yes, Manling. With one provision." "What's that?" "If von Hallstatt is the chaos-worshipping, Skaven-loving, snotling fonder we saw in the sewer, then we kill him." An appalled silence hung over the chamber. The import of the Trollslayer's words sunk into their brains. Felix felt his mouth go dry. What the dwarf was suggesting was murder, pure and simple. No, he decided, thinking of Gant and the dead in the new quarter, it wasn't murder, it was justice. He'd go along with that. Fine. "There's no backing out then, Rudy?" The bald-headed man looked shocked. His face was pale and fear was in his eyes. "I don't know what you're suggesting." "Are you coming with us or not?" Rudy didn't answer for a second. "Yes," he said at last. "I'll come. I just hope you're not wrong, that's all." "I'm not," Felix said. "That's what I'm afraid of." The sewers had never seemed so ominous to Felix. Shadows danced away from the lantern light. Every time he heard Rudy's heavy tread behind him, he had to fight the urge to look around. The sound of the Slayer continually tapping the walls with his hatchet blade was getting on his nerves. He knew that Gotrek was only doing it to see if he could find a hollow area, but that did not make it any easier to take. Something was out there. He knew that now. Something had killed Hef and Spider, and their girl too, and it would surely kill the rest of them if they let it. It was the not knowing that was so terrifying. Not knowing what it was that hunted them. Not really knowing why. Not knowing how many Skaven might appear, nor what demonic henchmen they might have. The brothers had been formidable fighters, and they were gone. Worse than that, half of the cheap street shantytown had gone with them. Whatever dark thing sought them had no qualms about killing a lot of people to get to the ones it wanted. He asked himself why he had not simply fled the city-state. He could be on the road even now, not creeping about in this dark, smelly stinkhole. Why did he have to be cursed with this urge to interfere in what was really none of his business? He already knew the answer. He had to take a stand somewhere for something, because if he did not, he would be exactly like his brother Otto and all the others like him, pretending that he did not know what was going on, making deals with the darkness so that it would leave him alone, pretending all was right with the world when he knew that it wasn't. Knowing that something was wrong meant that he had to do something about it, even if the only reason for doing it was to keep his self-image intact and allow him to feel superior to those he despised. And if that made him feel a little more like the heroes he used to read about when he was young, well, so much the better. Thinking about his reasons kept his mind occupied and allowed him to forget his fears. He made himself concentrate on what he knew. The only real lead he had was that he knew that the head of the city's secret police was in league with the Skaven. He had seen it with his own eyes. He did not know why such a thing should be. He only knew that it was so, and that it should be stopped. "Stop daydreaming, manling. We've been down here for hours, and we still haven't found this secret entrance of yours. It'll soon be dark up above, and we're still no further forward." Felix gave his attention back to scanning the walls. From up ahead, the sound of Gotrek tapping the brickwork with his blade of the hatchet continued. Thanquol stared around the darkened room. He felt exposed here in the surface world, so high above the ground. He gazed out through the single window and then looked at the straw pallet. Bone Ripper stood hunched near the doorway, flexing his great claws. They had stood here in the dark for nearly 2 hours, and still there was no sign of their prey. He lashed his tail in frustration. Where was the stupid man-thing? Why wasn't he home in bed where he should be? They were all the same, frittering away their time in drunkenness and debauchery. They deserved to be replaced by the master race. He swore that he would make this particular man-thing pay for wasting a Grey Seer's valuable time. He didn't have any more time to waste. He had to meet with von Hallstatt and check on the arrangements that had been made for the Countess's homecoming ball. Soon, it would be time to reveal to him that Emmanuel's guest, the Emperor's own brother-in-law, was secretly a mutant, and worse yet, the Countess's latest lover. The fact that neither of these things were true was not in the slightest bit important. What was important was that when von Hallstatt had the Graf kidnapped and tortured, word of it would be released. War would come between Nuln and the rest of the Empire. The Emperor could not stand for the insult of his own brother-in-law being tortured by the Elector's secret police. Civil war would erupt. The greatest kingdom of mankind would be thrown into anarchy. The power of the Skaven would grow. The thought so excited Thanquol that he had to take some powdered Warpstone snuff to calm his nerves. The drug bubbled into his brain and filled him with delightful visions of torture, bloodshed, and agony. The sound of footsteps coming up the stairs brought him out of his reverie. He nodded to Bone Ripper. There was a tentative knock on the door. "Herr Jäger, it's me, Frau Zorin. Red time." Before Thanquol could countermand him, Bone Ripper threw open the door and dragged the old woman inside. "Herr Jäger, there's no need to be so rough." They were Frau Zorin's last words before Bone Ripper tore her throat out. Well, at least he wouldn't have to feed the rat ogre for another 3 hours, thought the Grey Seer. He waited for Bone Ripper to finish his meal. "Come, come, we have business elsewhere," he told Bone Ripper. They headed for the sewers and their meeting with von Hallstatt. "Success, manling," Gotrek exclaimed, and tapped again to make sure. He nodded his head smugly.
I've found the passage, or my mother was a troll.
I wouldn't bet against that, thought Felix, but he kept the thought to himself. He watched as the Slayer set down his hatchet and began to run his fingers around the brickwork.
Nice bit of work, this. Well concealed. Probably a dwarf, I'd say. No wonder I missed it the other day. The Git must have paid a dwarf crew to dig his bolt tunnel and then sworn them to secrecy. Now, if I'm right, there should be...
His stubby, powerful fingers pushed against a single brick. It sank into the wall. There came a quiet grounding sound, as of perfectly balanced counterweights shifting. A section of the wall slid back. Felix saw a small vestibule and a metal ladder leading up. Gotrek turned and smiled, revealing his missing teeth. He looked genuinely pleased.
Very nice work indeed. Bugger must have outdistanced me. Turned that corner and ducked in. No wonder I couldn't find him. My eyes were still stinging from the gas too.
There's no need to make excuses, Gotrek, Felix said.
No excuse, Manning. I just want... Are we going to stand around all night, young Felix? Are you going to go up and take a look around?
Rudy interrupted.
Me? Well, all this was your idea.
Felix saw the unease written on Rudy's face. The big man was scared by the prospect of burgling so important a citizen's home. Not surprisingly, thought Felix. He's a watchman. He's spent the last 10 years catching criminals, not being one.
Are you going to do it, Manning? Or should I?
The thought of the troll slayer clumping around upstairs galvanized Felix into action. He remembered Otto's words about there being Templars of the White Wolf on guard above. He didn't relish the prospect of being discovered by them. I'll take a look first, he said, and I'll let you know if it's safe. Felix held his breath and glanced around. The ladder emerged in another small chamber with a single door. This led out into a large wine cellar. Looking back, Felix saw that the door was attached to a wine rack, so that when it was closed, it was virtually invisible. Felix checked a label on one of the bottles. He blew away dust to reveal the emblem of one of the best Paravonian vineyards, De Gaules. Someone has expensive tastes, he told himself. He turned swiftly, reaching for his sword when he heard the ladder creak behind him. Gotrek's head poked round the doorway.
Don't wet yourself, Manning, it's me,
he said. Rudy emerged from behind him.
Right, let's check this house and see if we can find our friend, the chief magistrate.
Not so much noise above. The place sounds empty.
Let's hope so. I'll stay here,
Rudy said,
and make sure your line of retreat is covered.
Felix shrugged. It was probably better than having the big man blundering about up above. You do that. Felix made his way cautiously to the foot of the stairs, keeping his lantern to the narrowest aperture so that only the faintest glimmer of light showed.
I told you so. The house is empty,
Gotrek said. Felix had to admit it looked like the dwarf was right. Where were the White Wolf guards? Where were the servants? Guards are most likely at the gatehouse. But where are the servants? A place this size should have some...
You know about that, I suppose?
Yes. Felix gently put his foot on the stairs. A shiver ran down his spine as it creaked. Under his weight, he paused and held his breath. No one came to investigate.
Why are you being so quiet, Manling? There's no one here.
I don't know. Maybe it's just because it's not my house. I feel like a criminal. Why are you whispering?
You are being a criminal. So am I. Let's search this place and see what you can find. You take upstairs, I'll take below.
It was only after he padded off near silently that Felix noticed that Gotrek was moving stealthily too. Felix moves on up the stairs, hoping that they would not creak.